I love that song.
It's a song that gets you pumped.
Recording already?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't want to forget. Okay, so that's the end of the song. I don't think I'm going to put another song on. So Diana, I think we can go ahead and start.
Okay, great. Welcome to the session today. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Diana Cottrell, and I'm going to be the producer for today's event. So we are going to be taking attendance for this event. So to help me do that, if you don't already have your name displaying in your box and you would like to update your box to show your full name, the way that you do that is you hover over your box with your cursor. A little blue box will pop up with 3 dots, and you can update your name by clicking rename. So if you hover over your own square, you should be able to click that. If that doesn't work out, the other thing you can do is you can use the more button in the participant box. If you go to where your name is in the participant box and click more, you'll see an option that says rename, so you can rename yourself. So if you could type your full name in there for me, please. If you have any problems doing that, you can also just send me a chat in the chat box. I'm Diana Cottrell. You can send me a direct message and I can fix that for you to display your name. I'm also going to be monitoring the chat box today to help out, and they will be taking questions at the very end. So if you have questions along the way, just type those into the chat and we'll come back to them at the end when we have time for questions. Thank you.
Right. So I will introduce myself next. My name is Catherine Harlow, and I am one of the sexual violence counselors with Fairfax County Domestic and Sexual Violence Services. And I'll be one of your presenters today.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Angie Acosta, and I will be presenting with Catherine today. So you are here for the second sexual violence series presentation on supporting sexual assault survivors. So why is it important? With sexual assault being so prevalent, it is possible that you will encounter someone in your lifetime that will disclose to you. If you are in a helper role, the chances of being asked to respond to a disclosure may be higher. So it is important to know how to respond in an empathetic, and trauma-informed way. Sexual assault is a deeply serious, traumatic, and humiliating experience, and telling someone about it is often terrifying. A sexual assault survivor's physical injuries may not always be significant, but the unseen psychological injuries may be severe. You do not need to be an expert in the area of sexual assault response, but how you respond to a disclosure is critical to a survivor's well-being and recovery. Research has shown that at least that the first person a victim or survivor discloses to will help determine whether or not they seek help. So a negative response to a disclosure can increase feelings of shame and isolation. We're seeing, you're not seeing the PowerPoint? Let me. Can you guys see it now?
Yes, that looks good.
Thank you. And when we discuss sexual assault disclosure, it is important to also talk about victim blaming. So victim blaming is both harmful not only to the survivor or victim, but also to society. So victim blaming occurs when the victim of a crime or any wrongful full act, occurs when the victim of a crime or any wrongful act is held entirely or partially responsible for the harmful that befell them. Unfortunately, victim blaming occurs at a higher rate among sexual victims than victims of any other crime. So why is it harmful? It is harmful because it causes survivors to feel unsafe and unable to tell their story, may cause survivors to not report their assault or avoid services such as advocacy, counseling, and frequently when the victim is a child, when they hear victim blaming, it often makes them recant their story or their disclosure. It increases shame in survivors and does not hold perpetrators responsible for their actions. So on the screen, you can see a couple of victim blaming statements. Victims of sexual assault often report that the way they were treated after the assault often felt worse than the actual assault itself. So what were you wearing? Why did you drink so much? You shouldn't have been out alone at night. You were flirting. What did you expect to happen? You should have been more careful. Did you even fight back? These are actual statements that DSVS counselors have heard from victims and survivors. So now we are going to watch a video. We won't watch the whole entire video. It will be stopped somewhat in the middle, but we will send out the PowerPoint presentation after this training, so you can have access to the video and finish watching it on your own.
We need to take a statement so we can establish what happened on Saturday night.
What time did you get back to David's flat?
What time? I don't know.
Can you give us an estimate?
I don't remember.
Would your pals remember what time you left the club?
He seemed nice.
She didn't remember much, did she?
I know. And now we've got to waste more time on a daft lecture. We know how to deal with victims. We've had years of experience.
Well, some of us have had more years than others.
I'm in my prime, I'll have you know.
That'll be right.
Today's session is about trauma. The latest in brain science will help you in your work. I'll start with a tour of the parts of the human brain. The reptilian brain maintains basic bodily functions. The limbic system is also instinctive. It deals with fear and pleasure. For example, you pat a dog, it senses pleasure, and without thinking, wags its tail. The neocortex is the site of logic, imagination, planning, and control. It's more sophisticated, but because it's conscious, it's slower than the older parts of the brain. The amygdala is a key part of the limbic system. It has one job: to sense danger and set off the alarm. When it's a matter of survival, the primitive parts of the brain override the conscious part. There are 3 possible survival responses: fight, flight, or the one that people don't think of, freeze. When the alarm goes off, blood and oxygen are diverted to muscles, adrenaline floods the body, and all systems that are not crucial to survival are switched off. Normally, the job of the hippocampus is to file memories so you can retrieve them later. But in times of danger, it stops filing memories, which makes it harder to gather evidence later on. Instead, the hippocampus switches to pumping cortisol. What's useful about cortisol is it stops us feeling pain, so we can focus on survival. Can anyone give me an example?
A farming accident where a man carried his own arm for a mile without feeling any pain?
Yes, excellent example. It is an evolutionary safety mechanism which is fast and instinctive. In essence, it's our body's very clever way of protecting us. To recap, an example of the 3 parts of the brain working together. You're standing at a bar. Your reptilian brain is keeping your heart beating. You're enjoying the pleasure of a nice pint with your limbic system. You're using your neocortex to work out if there's time for another before the last train. What could happen to make the amygdala kick in? What if this happened? The way you'd respond would depend not on your logical brain, but on your instinctive brain. Being glassed in a bar would be a traumatic experience. Who can give me another example of an event that can cause trauma?
War?
Rape?
A car crash?
Good, yes. Trauma occurs when a person is overwhelmed by something beyond their control. The survival brain...
Okay, so that's where we're going to go ahead and stop it. Like I said, we will send out the link. So if you would like to finish watching this video, it will be in the email.
And one of the reasons that we really like to show this video, and I share this video with a lot of my clients or with loved ones of my clients, at least that beginning part, is it's a really good example of a simplified model of how the brain and body respond to intense stress or traumatic situations. And this is important to know and be aware of because, you know, sexual abuse, sexual violence, what we're talking about here today, is a trauma. So understanding what's happening in the body and the brain during and after that trauma can help us to better understand how to support survivors. I also like about that video and want to highlight to everyone here today that freeze response they talked about. And how they identified that how we respond when we're overwhelmed, how we respond in the face of trauma is largely instinctual. It's not a choice. And most survivors of sexual trauma report a freeze response. So most, well over 50% report freezing at some point during that trauma. So knowing that it's instinct and not a choice can be really helpful because it's not the same, freezing is not the same thing as doing nothing. to try to protect yourself. It's just you didn't have the choice, and the body and the brain just shut down to try to protect you. And so we do want to, and the video, if you continue to watch, would go into some of the stuff that we're going to talk about, which is why we paused it so we can have a little bit more of a discussion about it, which is the common responses after the trauma. So you've kind of gotten the idea of how the brain works during that trauma. So afterwards, we want to look at the way trauma can present in survivors. So things that you might be seeing or hearing from survivors of a sexual trauma or any trauma, really, so that you can kind of be aware of what to look out for. And these include physical symptoms, psychological symptoms, behavioral, and social symptoms. Some of the common physical symptoms are increase in headaches and migraines, upset stomach, nausea, changes in digestion or digestive distress, feeling more lethargic, lower energy, more aches and pains, more fatigue, chronic pain, changes in sleep, which could really go in either direction. It might be difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, nightmares that wake you up in the middle of the night, sleeping too much. So it could be hypo or hypersomnia. Changes in appetite, much like sleep, that could be eating a lot more and noticing unplanned weight gain. It could also be loss of appetite and noticing unplanned and rapid weight loss. These physical symptoms are really common in children, particularly like the stomach aches and digestive distress. Younger kids who experience trauma and high levels of stress will oftentimes struggle with sleeping and have a lot of digestive distress. And these are actual physical symptoms and responses to what the survivor is experiencing. So it's not fake. That survivor, that child's not faking a stomach ache to stay home from school. They are actually feeling those symptoms, even if they do have more of an emotional or kind of mental health and trauma related reason why they started. Some of the common psychological symptoms that we might notice are confusion, and that can impact memory as well, particularly memory related to that traumatic event. So this can make it difficult for a survivor to tell the story of the trauma and to disclose in a way that seems to make sense. They might be missing bits and pieces of it. They might know kind of a part here and a part there, but it might not have a beginning, middle, or end. And that can be quite normal because of the way that confusion and the way memories imprint during a trauma. Difficulty focusing, which can of course impact your ability to perform in school or work activities. Intrusive thoughts. So by this, we mean something kind of similar to a flashback, but more thought-based, where, you know, a survivor is trying to go about their day, trying to do normal tasks, and just out of nowhere, these thoughts and ideas about the sexual trauma just start flooding in, and they're having a hard time shutting them off. Worrying or ruminating, which could be about the trauma, or it could just be in general. You could notice, you know, if you have a loved one or somebody that's just gone through a trauma and now they're worrying about, like, they're worrying about being late more often, they're worrying about just everything. It can really spike the anxiety. Changes in self-esteem, blaming themselves, increased feelings of shame, and self-deprecating thoughts are also really common. Some of the behavioral things you want to look out for that you might start to notice is a survivor avoiding anything that reminds them of the traumatic event. This may be not wanting to talk about it. It could be avoiding people. It could be avoiding places that remind them of what happened. School avoidance, missing time from school, missing time from work, being less social. So you might notice, you know, less reaching out to, even though we know especially after this year we've spent feeling really isolated from folks. We know how important social connection is. Trauma can cause us to pull away and try to isolate. Increases in self-injurious behavior, suicidal ideation, or then use of substances to try to numb or avoid uncomfortable feelings. And then, of course, if you're noticing something like an increase in substance use, self-injury, or suicidal ideation, you do want to try to get that person some help and support, because those are some of the more severe and dangerous symptoms. Socially, difficulty trusting others can be really common. I know as a sexual violence counselor, a lot of my clients will the majority of my clients, not all of them, are typically women. They've typically been assaulted by men, though that's not always the case. So sometimes difficulty trusting men is something that I commonly see. Difficulty like re-entering the dating scene, trusting new people and not trusting their intentions, but even sometimes difficulty trusting people they've known for quite some time. That isolation and withdrawal, being more afraid of other people, and then changes in things like, sexual desire, interest, and comfort in sexual activity. And that can go in either direction as well. Some people may feel really uncomfortable and just not want to engage in any sexual relations. And then sometimes people will feel the need to be a little bit more sexualized. So we wanted to give you some tips on how you could respond to a disclosure if somebody discloses to you, whether it's a friend, a family member, a colleague, if you work for Fairfax County and you're in any sort of capacity, if you're a teacher or a police officer or a social worker, chances are you could encounter a situation where somebody's going to disclose to you because you're in a role where you've been identified as a safe person for them to talk to. So knowing what to do can be really helpful. And as Angie mentioned earlier, your initial response can be really, really important to these survivors because it can set the stage for how or even if they're going to continue to disclose moving forward. A survivor who has a really good experience disclosing and feels really supported is going to be more likely to feel comfortable continuing to tell their story. Somebody who feels shut down, isn't getting the support, feels blamed for what happened, that's a story they're probably going to keep to themselves for quite some time because it won't feel safe. So things you can do is believe them. Let them know you believe them too. Make that statement that, I believe you. Thank you for telling me. Because just because it's something horrible that we don't want to believe doesn't mean it didn't happen. Acknowledge that they're not to blame. Angie also highlighted how common victim blaming is in sexual trauma. And it's really important to acknowledge that we know you're not to blame. This is not your fault. The person responsible for this is the person that chose to be sexually abusive. That's the person that takes the burden of responsibility for this, and this was not your fault. Tell them that you're there for them. Even if you don't really know what to say, just, hey, I'm here if you need me, can be hugely helpful, them knowing that they can come to you if they need something. Ask them what they need and cater your support to their needs and concerns. So we want to try really hard in this situation, and it's difficult, but we want to try to avoid jumping into fixer role and just telling them what to do and telling them how they should handle this situation because it might not be right for them. And we want to go as slow or as fast as they are willing to go and just kind of be that supportive person there to help them along the way. Which goes, giving them time to heal. Somebody might disclose to you and then decide that they're not ready to talk about it for another year. They just wanted to get it out there. They wanted some sort of support, but they're not ready to go too fast. So kind of letting them define the timeline of their healing process. Respecting their privacy. So allowing a survivor regardless of their relationship with you, to tell you as little or as much as they want at whatever rate they feel comfortable sharing. Another component of respecting privacy is respecting personal and physical space. So your first instinct may be, if this is a friend or a loved one, maybe to reach out and hug them to let them know that you support them. But ask first, because given what they've been through, ask permission before touching or hugging, before coming into their space. So they really have a lot of control and the ability to choose what that healing process looks like. Don't pressure them to do anything they're not ready to do. This kind of goes into the trying not to be too much of a fixer, letting them guide the course of their healing, but also with things like whether or not they want to get a medical exam right away, whether or not they want to report to the police. These are things I hear a lot of survivors that come to me for treatment will get a lot of pressure from other people in their life to do these things because, their sister Googled what to do after a sexual assault. And it says like, oh, you should go get a forensic exam and you should go talk to the police. Just because that is what you might think that you would want to do. If they're not ready for it yet, that experience could be really triggering. So kind of letting them decide if and when they're ready to take those steps. Helping them find resources. So when they are ready, you've maybe done a little bit of the research for them. So not forcing them to use the resources, but letting them know like, hey, if you ever want it, I figured out what the phone number for the the right unit in the hospital is. I have, figured out what the reporting process is like and where you can go for that. I found out advocacy services, counseling services, so that you kind of let them know there's resources when they're ready to use them. And then be honest. This is a stressful experience for them. It can also be a stressful experience for the first person they disclose to, or the second or third person they disclose to, especially if it's not your specialty area. So be honest if you don't know what to say. Just say like, hey, I don't know what to say, but I care about you and I'm here to support you. And that honesty can go a long way, and they can hopefully help you figure out what you can do to support them. So some examples of appropriate responses. I think Angie gave us some of the responses that we hope after today people will not be inclined to use, but here's some of the things that you could say. So I'm sorry this happened to you, and I'm here for you. Once again, I believe you. You can tell me as little or as much as you want. Thanking them for telling you. So, thank you for telling me. That was really brave of you. What can I do to support you? What do you need right now? And then the other appropriate response is to just be present and available to listen, and available to give feedback as they need it, and to kind of be just a safe, healthy person for them. So there is, when it comes to disclosures, there are, we do want to acknowledge the legal system. If the person disclosing to you is an adult, so somebody over the age of 18, they are not obligated to report the sexual trauma, the sexual abuse, the crime to the police. That is their choice, if and when they choose to report. We do have mandated reporting rules. So if the person is a minor or an elderly or disabled adult, we do have some things that we have to follow. So if we were in person, I would probably, ask you all to raise your hand and let us know if you're a mandated reporter. And about 99% of the room typically raises their hand, particularly if we're mostly county employees. So if you're a mandated reporter, you're a mandated reporter. You've had to do the training. So you know that you have to report any instance of abuse or neglect of a minor. And that goes for sexual abuse as well, particularly if the minor is sexually abused by someone in a caregiver role. And those reports would be made to CPS, to Child Protective Services. From that point, what will typically happen is CPS will let you know if they're taking the case or not taking the case. If they take it, they'll connect with that child and with that family. They'll typically get the police involved as well, because it's more than just a CPS issue, it's also a crime. In Fairfax County, they will usually do any interviewing of the child at Safe Spot, which is our child advocacy center in this area, which is a really nice setup that we have for children, because it's a safe therapeutic environment where the kids can go, and they have somebody who works with the police but is also trained in mental health and forensic interviewing that can create a nice, like, safe way for those children to get interviewed. If you're not sure if a disclosed abuse falls under mandated reporting laws, like maybe you're not sure if the abuser fits the caregiver criteria, or you're confused because it was like another child that perpetuated the abuse. If you're not sure, just always give CPS a call, and they'll determine if it needs to be investigated. So that's not something that you need to determine. And it's better, if you're not sure, to get that child the help that they would need. We also, as mandated reporters, have to report instances of sexual abuse of a disabled adult or elderly adult. So that would be anybody over 60 years old or someone with a disability. And then that you can report to Adult Protective Services. We have provided those numbers. And you don't have to be a mandated reporter to report to CPS or APS. If you're not a mandated reporter and you have a concern about a child or an elderly or disabled adult in your life, you can always report to those proper authorities, and you can do so anonymously if that makes you feel more comfortable.
Okay, so we, when talking about disclosures of victims and survivors, we also have to acknowledge how it affects the person who is receiving the disclosure. We like to call those secondary victims / survivors. So there is no right reaction to hearing that someone you care about, love, has been through a sexual assault. You may experience some of your own trauma symptoms, and that is normal. So you may feel in disbelief. When you first hear about the assault, you might be surprised or shocked, and you might have trouble believing that the assault really happened. After a traumatic experience, it's common for survivors and those around them to really experience denial. But it's important for the healing of the survivor to focus on them and believing them and acknowledging their story and their disclosure. You may also feel anxiety. So you might feel that you might feel anxious about responding the right way. Am I saying the right things? Am I doing the right things? Like, what should I say? What shouldn't I say? Or worried about how this traumatic experience is going to impact your relationship with the survivor. Reassure the survivor that the assault was not their fault and that you believe them. These can be very powerful in helping words for the survivor to hear. Also, just thanking them for trusting you with this information. You may also experience some sadness when you learn about a trauma like a sexual assault. It's normal to feel sad, hopeless, worried, or sometimes even powerless. You may feel sad for the survivor or mourn how this may impact their life or change their life. So self-help strategies and coping skills can help you and the survivor move through these feelings. There's also feelings of anger. You might feel anger towards a number of people, towards yourself for not being able to protect the survivor, towards the survivor for feeling for them not disclosing to you earlier, or waiting a certain period of time before telling you. Or you may feel anger towards the perpetrator for carrying out the assault and hurting the survivor. It can be difficult to keep anger from affecting the way that you communicate towards a survivor, but let yourself acknowledge these emotions. Allow yourself, this is making me really angry, but find another outlet to express that anger. Try not to let it taint your conversation with the survivor. Some of us may also experience some guilt. You may feel guilty that you could not have prevented the assault from happening, and that the survivor didn't feel comfortable telling you about the assault right away, if the disclosure came later on. You may feel guilty that something so terrible happened to someone else and not to you. You know, that the feeling of like, why did it have to happen to her or him? Why couldn't it just happen to me? It can be helpful to refocus our energy on making the survivor feel supported as they move forward in whatever capacity they choose to move forward, whether it is to reporting to the police, reporting to an agency like Domestic and Sexual Violence Services, or going to the hospital and seeking medical assistance. Feeling helplessness or overwhelmed, you may feel overwhelmed by what you're hearing, depending on how much details the survivor victim is telling you. You might not understand how it can happen or why it has happened. Although you may be struggling with the feelings of helplessness, overwhelm, especially if you know the survivor, you should always try to believe the survivor and never blame them for the assault. As a secondary victim survivor of sexual assault, it is important to know that you should be able to also seek support. You need to acknowledge the way that you're feeling and make sure that you take care of yourself. Whatever feelings you are having, they are justifiable, and you have a right to feel the way you're feeling. Know that it is okay for you if you do need help. You have been traumatized by what has happened, and getting help will enable you to support the individual that was victimized in your life. And I will allow Catherine to explain trauma versus PTSD.
Yeah, so we don't have a slide about this, but I imagine we could get questions about it because a lot of times when people think about trauma, they automatically think PTSD, and you see those two things lumped together a lot. And while survivors of sexual trauma may experience post-traumatic stress disorder, it's not the only way that folks experience trauma. So some survivors might, post-traumatic stress disorder as a diagnosis is a cluster of symptoms. Like most of our diagnoses, you have to tick off a certain amount of boxes in each cluster, and they have to occur in a certain period of time. So post-traumatic stress disorder requires that within, that symptoms last longer than a month. if it's anything less than a month, then it's acute stress disorder. If it's kind of immediately and the symptoms occur right away, and then fizzle out and you no longer meet the criteria after a month, then that was an acute stress disorder. But post-traumatic stress disorder requires that you meet intrusive symptoms. So that would be, those flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, avoidance symptoms. So avoiding going places, avoiding people or activities that remind you of your trauma, avoiding talking or thinking about the traumatic event, alterations in self or mood. So, changes in maybe an increase in mood swings, changes in mood, feelings of hopelessness, lack of interest in activities that you once enjoyed are all examples of those negative alterations in mood. And then changes in physical and emotional reactions. So things like difficulty concentrating, maybe those more self-destructive behaviors like substance use or self-harm, hypervigilance, so being on edge all the time, easily frightened. So these, in order to meet the criteria for PTSD, you have to have symptoms from all 4 of these symptom groups, and the symptoms have to last longer than a month. So that would be PTSD, but somebody who doesn't meet that full criteria is still a survivor of trauma, and they still need the same level of support. It just looks a little bit different on paper. So I just kind of wanted to mention that, depending on what your role with that person is, that just because somebody's maybe not having flashbacks every day doesn't mean that they're not healing from a trauma. It just looks a little different and is presenting a little bit differently for them.
Okay, and now to talk about some resources that are available to you or to your clients or loved ones. So Fairfax County Domestic and Sexual Violence Services, DSVS, does offer a 24-hour hotline. So anybody can call this hotline, whether you are a service provider or a neighbor, a friend, a family member. If someone has disclosed to you and you want to learn about the services that are available, or if you want to just talk to somebody about how you can or should respond to their disclosure or how to support them, you can call the hotline and we can walk you through the situation. We also offer advocacy services. So our advocates from our Domestic Violence Action Center are available to speak one-on-one with victims and survivors. What our advocates do is they will kind of go over the whole incident and tell the victim survivor what are their options, whether it is going to, reporting options, legal options, medical options, just going over through all of the options that he or she may have, and then allowing the victim survivor to decide which option he or she would like to go. The advocate can walk the survivor through the path that he or she decides to go through. Counseling is also available. Right now we are offering telehealth, so it is virtual. It is free short-term counseling, and our counseling services are offered to primary and secondary victim survivors. So if you are a parent of a victim survivor, sibling, or significant other, you can also receive counseling from DSVS. We also offer hospital accompaniments. So if the victim survivor decides to go get medical attention, right now we are doing telephonic hospital accompaniments. So we're talking to the victim survivor when they are at the hospital and giving them options and talking about the services that are available to them. So they will be connected to DSVS when they are at the hospital. All of these services from DSVS, we don't need insurance, and everyone can receive services no matter what their legal status is. And we've also included some websites that have some very useful information on how to respond and how to support victim survivors. If you go on any of these websites, you can do put in keywords. Supporting survivors is a good one, and you can find out more information and ways that you can support a survivor. And here is our contact information. Right now, Michelle Mueller will be putting in the chat box a really short survey. So if you wouldn't mind, we are still not at 2 o'clock. So if you just want to could take a couple minutes just to fill out the survey for us. And the link will be found in the chat box. And now we can go ahead and address any questions that may have come up. So there is, it's not a question, but it says from my Kayla. I think I'm pronouncing your name correctly. She is a residential coordinator and victim advocate here at Samaritan House in Virginia Beach. I'm guessing that acronym is. If anyone ever gets a call from Hampton Roads area and needs a resource, we are the largest organization in Virginia providing emergency housing and support services in our 24-hour hotline. Thank you. So if, let's say, someone from Virginia Beach or from Loudoun County, Prince William, if they call our hotline and they're looking for services in their area, our hotline will definitely connect them to the appropriate hotline where they can seek services, because it's just easier for them to seek services where they live. There was a question in the chat box. Do you take volunteer clinical social workers to assist with providing services? So we do have a lot of volunteer opportunities. I'm not sure if you are asking specifically on counseling services. We don't use volunteers for counseling services, but we do have volunteers answering our 24-hour hotline, court accompaniment. We have volunteers completing hospital accompaniments and other programs as well. If you are interested in volunteering, I will type the name of the supervisor who is in charge of the volunteer section in our office. That is her email address. We recruit volunteers twice a year. So in the spring and in the fall. So you are still, you are in good timing to, if you're interested in volunteering, because we will start recruitment maybe like late summer. Does anybody else have any other questions? And you can either unmute yourself or put it in the chat box, whatever is best for you. And like I mentioned earlier, you will be receiving these slides today or tomorrow. So you'll have access to this information as well as the links for the video and the websites. Well, I guess if any questions come up, please don't hesitate to contact Catherine or I. Our contact information, it will also be on the PowerPoint slides. But thank you so much for joining. Is there a link to register for more classes? Yes, I will make sure that the link is, I will include the link in the email with the PowerPoint slides. So this is number 2 of the sexual violence series. We have one every month. So there's going to be one in May, and the topic on that one is impact of child sexual abuse on adult male survivors. That will be on May 17th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. And Abby, thank you. She put in the link so you can register via the link, or I will also include it in the email with the PowerPoint slides. But thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope that you have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.